So Steve Jobs is someone who fascinates me. As someone who at one point in time described himself as a socially awkward loner during his younger years, to someone who evolved to become probably the most charismatic speaker of all time, in my opinion. And if you add that to the fact that he was a very private person, he had a lot of introverted traits, and also that just all of this, his speaking ability, his ability to lead and inspire people, just didn't come naturally to him. To me, I take that as proof that anyone can become charismatic. So as an introverted guy who's trying to become a super communicator, I've studied some of Steve Jobs' most charismatic behaviors, and this is what I've learned. So the first idea I want to talk about is the reality distortion field. So people who'd worked for Steve Jobs described this ability that he had to almost bend reality to his will, to translate these insane ideas into reality, to achieve things that other people deemed impossible and create his own version of reality. Now, what this actually was this blend of charisma, persuasion, and just like pure mental willpower, like the inability to accept that something couldn't be done. He blended all of those things together and he used it to exert this incredible influence over people that work for him. He was said to be able to bring anyone to his way of thinking, to convince them of any idea and that it was achievable. So like whatever impossible deadline that he set for his staff, they'd be so inspired that they'd end up meeting that anyway. And Bill Gates once observed the reality distortion field in effect. And he said he looked around the room and it was like he could literally see people's eyes widening. He said it was like Steve Jobs was casting spells on these people, like they were so mesmerized. And I've always found this idea just like so interesting, that his words delivered in such a way could have that impact on people. So I've studied how we can start to do this for ourselves as introverts. And there's lots of different components to it, but I'm going to share the main one with you. And that is passion. So I've always been told as an introvert, and I've always read this in books, that the best way to be a good conversationalist is to focus on the other person, is to listen attentively and then talk about the things that they find interesting, because people are their own favorite subject. So surely we should take advantage of that. Now, this on its own is not bad advice, because conversation is a two-way thing and we should be curious. We should be trying to find out more about the other person. But as introverts, what we need to remember is that we have a finite amount of energy, of social energy. Our social battery, if we don't use it in the right way, can drain very quickly, and then we're just going to want to leave. So we have to consider which activities, which conversational topics are going to drain our social battery versus which is going to give us energy. What is going to energize us and just allow us to talk non-stop and not feel like leaving the conversation. So the best thing that I've found for doing that is talking about something which we are genuinely passionate about, something which we love. A lot of people seem to think that when Steve Jobs was up on stage delivering a presentation or unveiling the next iPhone, that he was just putting on a character, that he trained himself to act more extroverted. And I actually think that couldn't be further from the truth. I think that it was just down to the fact that he loved what he was talking about. He was so passionate about the subject that whether it was a 20-minute presentation or he had to spend 10 hours on stage, I think he could have talked for any amount of time up there with full enthusiasm. That was just how much he cared about the topic. And the thing is, the passion with which he pitched his ideas, the intensity of how much he cared, was enough to make the audience feel the exact same thing. All of that passion carried over to them, to the point where they were so fully convinced that they were hearing some like life-changing information. All of this energy went straight to the crowd. And the lesson in charisma that I've taken away from this is it doesn't matter what your interests are, whether they're the most boring things in the world, like bird watching, or like, you just like looking at trains all day. If you talk about it with enough passion, if you show how much you care when bringing this topic into conversations, you can make even the most boring topic in the world seem interesting to someone else. It's like a little example from my life, and this is going to sound really nerdy, but when I first started going out with my ex-girlfriends, I just like talk non-stop about fucking comic books. Like, I absolutely love Marvel comics, and I'm pretty sure I spent like an hour talking to her once just about like all of the different Spider-Man villains and like ranking which ones were my favorite. And I think I always had it in the back of my head that was just like nothing I should be talking about with a girl. But one time I actually like walked in on her watching a video, like doing revision on all the Spider-Man characters so she could have a conversation with me. And I asked her about it and she said, I just love hearing you talk about things you're passionate about. So honestly, anything at all in the world, even the most like nerdy or geeky topic that you're interested in, you can make it sound fascinating. You can convey your passion and enthusiasm to the other person. So the actionable step for you here is, don't be afraid to guide the conversation away from like the small talk phase into something more deep, into something which you find really interesting. Because to be honest, most people absolutely suck at expressing themselves and they will just get hung up on the boring small talk phase. So as long as you do it in a polite way, if you're able to transition the conversation into something that you really care about, most people will welcome the chance to have a fun and lively conversation. So the second thing we're going to talk about is how Steve Jobs used practices from Zen Buddhism to come across as more charismatic. So Steve Jobs had this famous ability that when he was speaking to someone one-on-one, he could make them feel like the only person in the universe that mattered. He just had this insane one-on-one charisma where he was able to empower the other person so much, to make them feel so important that, and this was a part of the reality distortion field, that they could then feel like they could go off and accomplish some impossible deadline or an impossible task. But the thing is, he didn't do this through warmth or by being friendly, because for better or worse, Steve Jobs didn't care about being liked. He wasn't trying to win any popularity contests. He did this by giving them his full, undivided attention and nothing less. So I think that introverts, or definitely me at least, I have this natural tendency to want to listen, to not be the one talking all the time, to actually process what's being said to me. But I'll start to get paranoid or a bit self-conscious that I'm slowing down the conversation if I take too long to reply, or I take too long to listen, or that the other person is going to think it's awkward, or I'm coming across as a little bit cold or disengaged. But what Steve Jobs realized was that his undivided, thoughtful attention was much more powerful for building connections with other people than fake niceness or just talking for the sake of it. So he was really into Buddhism and Eastern philosophies in general. And he'd use practices from Zen Buddhism like present moment awareness and deep focused concentration to be more charismatic and influential. And I'm going to tell you now exactly how he did that. So first of all, when he was speaking to someone, he maintained laser focused, intense eye contact with them. He did not let eye contact up for a second. And a lot of people actually found this pretty uncomfortable, or they felt quite intimidated by it. Like, imagine walking into a presentation and this guy is just eyeballing you the whole time, the CEO of your fucking company. That's some scary shit. But what it did was show that he was 100% committed to them and their words. He wasn't thinking about anything else. He was not distracted. 100% of his focus was on them and their words. So generally what I do as an introvert is I'm not giving 100% eye contact to people, because sometimes that doesn't always send the right message. But equally, people do tell me that I have quite strong eye contact. And for me, that's important because I want them to feel like they have my full attention, that I'm not distracted, and that what really matters to me in this moment is them and their words. And the second thing he would do was use strategic pauses. Now, I find this idea of strategic pauses really interesting because as an introvert, I'm always worried about my silences or breaks in the conversation when I'm not entirely sure of what to say next. I'm always conscious of that being perceived as shyness or awkwardness. And I'd often end up rushing to fill that silence, just blurting out some half-baked thoughts or making myself look kind of dumb just because I want to fill that silence. And at the same time, I've not even really taken in and processed what the other person has said to me. But what Steve Jobs used to do was, instead of waiting for his turn to speak or cutting in or interrupting, he would not utter a single word until he'd finished deeply processing what the other person had said to him. He would let the silence hang as long as he possibly could until he'd come up with something more thoughtful. And you can find clips of this online. Like, I remember seeing this clip of Steve Jobs in a presentation, and some student asked him a question, and someone timed this. He paused for like a solid 2 minutes and 10 seconds. He just like paced up and down the stage, just thinking of what to say. It's like he didn't care about all these people in the crowd. All he cared about was coming up with a more thoughtful and profound answer to this question. But the thing is, do you think the people in that crowd perceived him as awkward? It's an awkward silence. Or do you think that, wow, he's really taking his time here, so he must be about to just share some great wisdom. He's about to say the most profound, deep thing that I've ever heard. And not only did he give a better, more thoughtful response because of how much time he took to answer, he also had the other person feeling like they mattered so much more. Because surely to take that amount of time to come up with an answer, surely the question that he was asked in the first place had to have been like quite deep or complex or worthy of such a long answer. So this is something I'm really trying hard to implement, just taking a bit longer of a pause to come up with a more thoughtful answer. It's a win-win situation. You don't get to rush yourself, and the other person ends up feeling more important as a result of this. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Those are the things that Steve Jobs did to help me as an introvert become more charismatic. Take care, man. I'll see you in the next one.